looked after, they had their food and they had their nappies changed, but they were dying, huge numbers of them. And so they found that in actual fact what was happening, that the babies weren't loved. And so there was no need to live, there was no will to live, there was no thriving in the children, and they were just dying. So now they've brought in people who just love the children. Even in hospitals, when the families can't get there, they will bring people in just to stroke and love and care for the kids, so that not just their physical needs are being met, but their emotional needs are being met, so that kids are loved in a way that makes them want to live. Now, even in Australia now, they say that hundreds of children, about 3% of the admissions in hospitals every year, are from children who are just simply not loved enough. And hence they're not growing and they're not thriving and they're not well. So we have to really be careful that our love needs in the child are being met. Now, please don't think from that, well, I've got a child who hasn't been well lately, maybe I'm not loving him enough, because it's not as cut and dried as that. Okay, I'm sure that just the fact that you parents have come out to a seminar like this show that you really do care for your children enough and they won't be unhealthy because of lack of love. But it can be a cause. If they're underweight and they're not thriving and they're not feeding well, it can be because they're not loved. Mental development, they say that a loving home is the key to good marks at school. A child who is doing well at school is usually a child who is loved. Now, once again, don't think, well, I've got a child who's struggling at school, it must be because I'm not meeting his love needs. But there are children, and I'm a school teacher, that I have taught at school who I know are not reaching their potential because they aren't loved securely at home. It may be because they've gone through a broken marriage in their parents, the single parents, a lot of strife in the home. There can be a lot of reasons why that child perceives themselves as unloved, and yet, although their intelligence is there, they just don't do well in school. It's really tragic, but it does happen. I just sometimes yearn to want to say to the parents, listen, this child's lacking love, you know. You need to pour more love into this child and he'll do better at school. Or you need to work on your marriage and have a successful, thriving, happy, productive marriage, and that child will perform better in school. Of course, lack of love also affects their attitude. You'll notice a person who is secure is a person who's got a good self-image. I notice that people who've got a poor self-image tend to be very critical and negative, not just to themselves, but to other people. You know, is anybody who's really critical about other people, very judgmental about other people, if you look at them, you'll see that inside they're just really insecure and lacking a good self-image. So if you want your kids to grow up with healthy, emotionally, with a good self-image, then you need to give them the love that we're talking about tonight, and it will work against having that negative, critical, judgmental attitude in them, which is a pretty sad way to be. Then, of course, it affects their reaction to peer pressure. If a child's not having his love needs met in home, where will he go to get them met? He'll go out into the community, won't he? He'll go to his peer group. And children who have not got their love needs met in the home are very vulnerable to peer pressure, very vulnerable to what's going on in the group around them. So if they're with a group of kids and all the kids are having drugs, a child is there who's not secure in himself, not loved in himself. He's sitting there, everybody else is doing it. Somebody says to him, come on, why don't you do it? And he's kind of thinking, I don't think this is a bright idea. But he will go for the drugs to get group acceptance. He's starved for acceptance, starved for love, and therefore he will want to fit in with the group. Whatever it is, if they're all shoplifting, they'll turn around to him and say, come on, are you coming? And he hasn't got the inside that strength that says no, because he's got to have love. So we look for love in places that we don't really, or shouldn't really look for them in love. But a child who is loved doesn't have to go along with the group. Now, what I'm saying is not just theory. I've observed my children. They've grown up through teenage years now, and they're in their 20s. And I noticed that through those teenage years, there was absolutely no interest in going into drugs or shoplifting or going with the gangs or doing all the kind of things that they could have done. They were in a normal government school and they met kids that were on drugs, and they were kids, they well knew who were the drug pushers in the school, and they well knew kids who were using drugs, and they well knew who the kids were that were getting into trouble in the law, and yet there was absolutely no interest in doing it. And I know that the major reason is because their love needs were being met in the home by their mother, by their father, a secure marriage, and that love was just being poured in them. And so if anybody was doing something wrong, they had the strength within them to say, no, I don't want to. And it didn't matter if the rest of the peer group laughed at them, because what's it matter what the peer group really thinks if you know that you loved at home and you've really got that strength of security that comes from being loved at home. Now, there are other reasons why too, of course, because there were so many other their needs being met that what was the interest in getting into these things anyway. There are other reasons why that I won't go into tonight, but they're on some of my other tapes that I've got. Which reminds me, I might just mention now that there are tapes available on this particular topic. There are videotapes and audio tapes. Also the discipline and obedience one. There's another one on TV and your child. And I'd just like to mention you might do everything else right, but if you let the kids watch absolutely anything they like on TV, it can undo everything else that you do as a parent. TV is that damaging. Most of the programs are showing a family lifestyle that you don't really want to live. Isn't that right? Is that right? Yeah. No? Most of them are showing a family that is not loving and supporting and speak nicely to each other. Mostly there is conflict and tension, and your kids see that on the television, and that's what they will become like, because what we watch we become. So you have to be so careful and monitor. If you want good, healthy, emotionally kids that and secure and productive in society and all those other things, then you have to make sure that they don't watch things on television that are going to affect all the good that you're putting into them, because it's like you're pouring all the good in and it's just flowing right out. So that's all on a tape, TV and your child. Then there's another one on, are we being manipulated by our children? And then there's raising godly kids or raising Christian kids. And that gives a lot of answers that I won't be dealing with at all tonight. Another one on parenting teens and identifying your children's giftings. All right, back to the notes. Lack of love in this shaded area is the root responsible for nearly all the problems in the human personality. Children are constantly forming a picture of themselves by gauging others' impressions of them. Now, this is what it's like. I brought along a mirror tonight. When you are speaking to your child, you are giving them a picture of what they are really like. In other words, if you keep saying to them they're stupid and lazy and a pest and a nuisance and all those kind of things, then that is the kind of picture that they see. When they look into the mirror, they see somebody who's stupid, somebody who'll never amount to anything, somebody who's lazy. And you as parents are the most vital input into those child's self-image. Right from conception onwards. The words that you speak are what they are going to think about themselves, and it's like you're forming a mirror that they are going to look in and see themselves as. Now, of course, as they go outside the home, they come into contact with other people, and those people also affect their self-image. When they go to school, they can have teachers who sometimes can destroy their self-image by comments that they make. And as I said to you, I'm a teacher, and I know that before I understood all these concepts, sometimes in frustration, you can lash out at a child and say something that can really wound their spirit. Even as the most conscientious teachers can sometimes say something, maybe misjudge your child. Your child comes home from school and says, you know, my teacher said that I did this wrong and it wasn't me, it was the boy next to me. And they can be really wounded with things like that. They can have teachers who say to them, well, you're no good at maths. You'll never be any good at maths. You know, it's just like writing a prescription over their lives, isn't it? Fortunately, when they go to university and learn how to be teachers, the teachers are learning these important things, and they're trying hard not to say things like that that will affect their kids. But then, of course, there's the playground. You might have great input into your child at home. The teacher might be wonderful and always building their self-image up, and then they get out into the playground. Kids can be so cruel. They pick on the one thing that's different about you from everybody else, don't they? And they can say things that can really wound and hurt your children. Now, if you've been giving them adequate love at home, those things can begin to bounce off them and not really affect them deeply. But if you can imagine if they're deprived of adequate love at home and then they've gone out into the school ground, it can really be very, very damaging for them. The subconscious mind records all the impressions, the words and the emotions that are received and perceived by it from conception. Now, on the left-hand side, we're going to go through some things that our children may think, or maybe they don't even actually consciously form the words, but they get the impression. And on the right-hand side is what our reactions really should be. The first one, and the most dangerous one, and the most common one, is my parents only love me if I please them or obey them. Now, that's called conditional love. Have we all heard of conditional love? It's a love that says you have to earn my love. You have to deserve to be loved. And it's a love that we sometimes give if they're good, but we withdraw it if they're naughty. It's a love that can really damage our children for life. Now, on the right-hand side, it says how to develop a good self-image. Unconditional love says, I choose to love you. Now, in actual fact, as soon as we hear that we're having a baby, that should be our reaction, even if it's not one that we wanted. I choose to love you. It's a choice that I make up here. Sometimes we don't even feel like loving our kids, but it's a decision that we've made up here in our mind and our will that we will love that child. I love you no matter what you act like, no matter what you look like, no matter what you talk like. I will always, always, always love you. Now, that's not easy. Can you all say that that's easy all the time? Has anyone found they love their child non-stop all the time? That just gushy, wonderful feelings flow through them to their kids all the time? Has anyone found that ever? Okay, but that's what the kid needs. How do we get there? Well, I've got to tell you that when my children were first born, I didn't love them all the time. As a matter of fact, I had a very strong-willed child. Who's got a strong-willed child? Who's got more than one strong-willed child? My child was so strong-willed that even the teacher at his school said she'd never taught a child that was more strong-willed in her whole teaching career. The principal of the school said he'd never had a more strong-willed child in his school. That's pretty strong-willed, isn't it? Guess what? A strong-willed child's not always lovable. Because a strong-willed child confronts you all the time, argues with you all the time, doesn't amicably want to go with what you want to do all the time. Right? Frustrating. One day my husband said to me, Liz, you cannot love your kids, my kids, our kids, with this on-again, off-again type of love. He said, you love them when they're good and they're happy and they please you and they do the right thing and they're obedient. But he said, you're not loving them when they're naughty and they're awful. And I was really shocked that I couldn't do it like this, because I thought that was the way that you just loved. In fact, that's the way I was loved when I was growing up. I knew that there were certain things that I could do that would make my parents love me more. And I knew there were certain things that I could do that would make them love me less. Is that how you've been brought up, some of you? You know that your parents loved you at certain times but didn't love you at other times, and you knew that you had to be careful to stay within that love by staying within those boundaries, whatever they were that your parents had set for you. And so naturally I love my kids the same way until my husband said, you can't do this. Now that really pulled me up in my tracks, because I had no idea how to love any other way. In fact, I even loved my husband like it. How was I going to love my kids even when they were horrible? Well, there were a few things that I nutted out that really helped me, and I hope they help you tonight too. First one is, now that might not look all that stunning to you, but this is the most incredible concept that got me. Say you've got a daughter who has got a mouth that gives you a problem. You know, no, I don't mean she's got ulcers in it. She's got arguments in it and swear words in it. And every time you say something, she says the opposite. Every time you want to do something, she wants to do something else. And you tend to look at that person and you just think they are so frustrating because they argue with me all the time, or they're so frustrating because they contradict all the time. They're so frustrating because they always want to do the opposite thing. And you tend to look at the child as a whole package. That's the kind of child they are. Now, this is what really, really helped me. I learned to separate the person out from what they did. I've been showing this transparency for years, and it was only the other day somebody said to me, oh, you cut their tongue out. Wrong. What I learned to do was to separate the person out from the thing that they did. Now this changed my whole way of looking at everybody, not just my kids. In actual fact, I could love the person, but I didn't have to love what they did. So I could love my child, but I didn't have to love his strong will. I could love my child, but I didn't have to love the bit that argued back all the time. I could love my child, but I didn't have to love the things about him that really annoyed and frustrated and hurt and disillusioned and all those things, because my kids weren't born perfect. You might have had some that were, but mine weren't. And I had problems until I learned to love the person but not love what they did. Now, amazing that this had never dropped into my head before, because as soon as I realised that that was the way God loved us. He loves us always, but he doesn't like what we do. He never loves what we do. He hates what we do wrong, the bad things. He calls it something starting with S. Anybody know? Yes. And even though he loves us, he doesn't love the bad things that we do. And so I had that same love developing within me that could love my children but didn't have to love the bad things they did. Now this area, of course, has to be trained, corrected, disciplined, and that's what we're going to look at in our next session. We don't just let it go unnoticed, just the way God wants us to eliminate these areas from our lives. But the thing is, it never alters his love. Never. Doesn't matter how many times we do the wrong thing, he still loves us perfectly. And the amazing thing was, I had God's love inside me. The Bible said that God's love is shed abroad in my heart. So I actually had this kind of love that could love the person but didn't have to love what they did. And all I really had to do was open up myself and let God's love flow through me into those kids. It wasn't really all that hard at all. God's love. Filling in where my love was inadequate. God's love that was perfect, unconditional, agape, the Bible calls it. So we got to the point where it says here, nothing that you do can alter my love for you. And that's how it is. Nothing that they do will alter my love for them. And I have said that to my children. I love you perfectly, always, completely, unconditionally. Nothing that you ever do will stop me loving you. I've told my kids that over and over and over again. Now, some of you might think, boy, if I said that to my kids, they'd just go out and raise hell, because they know they can come back home and I'll still love them. But you see, it doesn't work like that. In actual fact, the love that you give your children doesn't release them to go out and do crazy things. It's the other way around. The more that you love them, the more they want to please you. The more that you love them, the more they are good. And I found that with my own kids, even though I've said to them, it doesn't matter what you do, I'll keep on loving you. Instead of sending them out to go and do something weird and then come back and say, well, you still have to love me, Mum, it's like there's a motivation to want to do the right thing, even though they know that they won't be loved, they'll still be loved even if they do something wrong. But it brings out that goodness. And God's the same way to us. The more he loves us and the more that we are aware of his love for us, the more we desire to do his will. Isn't that right? It's not like because we think, oh, God will love me, whatever I'll do, I'll just go out and, you know, shop, get that new dress out of the shop without paying for it or something. It's the goodness of God that leads us to repentance, and it's his love that says, I love you so much. And you say, well, I don't really want to go out and do those wrong things when I've got that love. And your kids will be the same. What's the point? I've already got all the love and attention I need. I don't have to go out and do something crazy. So this is a great principle, and I've used it with many people, not just my children. I'll provide stable, secure and consistent love even in your emotional extremes. I'll love you even when I don't feel like it, even when I'm angry with you. This is the kind of cute thing that one of my kids would come out with. Just think, if I hadn't put my marbles in the dryer, you wouldn't have got a chance to talk to the repairman about Jesus. Have you got a cute little kid like that? Always thinks up something cute to say when you're really just at screaming point. I love you even when I'm disappointed in you, even when I'm frustrated with you. I want my love to be as unconditional as possible because the future of my child depends on it. So I would say, if there's nothing else that you get out of tonight, if you just remember that your unconditional love is the thing that's going to draw the goodness out of your kids. And their emotional future depends on it. You know, I knew, when Rob told me that, I knew that if I didn't do something quick about loving my kids, they were going to grow up emotionally warped. That they were not going to have good self-images, that they were not going to be whole emotionally. Now, here's 4 questions that we'll just go through quickly, just to give us an idea of, they're not on your notes. I'm not actually up to page 2 just yet. Does a person's performance determine the degree of love and acceptance that you give them? That's conditional love. Do you feel love and acceptance is given as a reward for good behaviour? It's easy to get into that trap. Love them more because they've done something good. And you kind of think, boy, if I love them when they do something good, they're going to keep on wanting to do good things because they know I'll keep loving them. And in actual fact, they're learning to earn our love. And some of us can take that character trait right through into adulthood, all the time trying to earn people's love. Do you feel they have to change before you can love them? You might be waiting a long time. Do you think you can change their behaviour by withholding love and acceptance? Now, in actual fact, you probably will change your kids' behaviour by withholding love and acceptance. It'll get worse. Now, if some of you are thinking, well, I really want to love my kids like that, but boy, I don't even know what mother love's like because I never really had a mother that loved me, or I don't even know what father love's like because I never really had a father who loved me. I've got good news for you. God says in the Bible that if your mother and your father forsake you, now that doesn't just mean they ran off and left you, it might just mean that they didn't meet your emotional needs. If your mother and father forsake you, then the Lord will take you up and adopt you as his child. In other words, if you are missing father love for any reason at all, maybe your dad left home or he was always busy, he never had time for you, let you down, didn't keep his promises, was abusive, all those things, God promises to give you the love that you didn't get from your dad. Isn't that fantastic? God promises to give you the love that you didn't get from your mum. So we don't have to go through life emotionally crippled ourselves saying, oh, how am I going to meet all these needs of all these kids when I haven't even got the love I need? Because God will give us that love. All we've got to do is ask for it. All right, page 2. My mum and dad don't accept me because they expect me to live up to a perfect image or ideal. My best is never good enough. Sometimes when we have new little babies, we sort of think, oh, I just expect so much from this little baby. You know, he's going to be so gorgeous. And I've read all these parenting books and I'm going to have this wonderful child. And sometimes they just don't turn out quite as wonderful as we think they're going to be. And they have weaknesses. And we just thought they were going to be really great. And they mightn't be terribly bright at school. Or they mightn't be terribly good at athletics. Or there might be things about them that we wish they didn't have. And sometimes we have to lower our standard a bit. Sometimes we have to lower our standard a lot. And so I'm going to love this child anyway. I find that as a parent that you can often expect too much of your kids. And kids can go to bed and think, well, I just don't think I'll ever make it in this house. It's too impossible. I know days when my kids came home from school and they'd walk in the door and they'd throw their school bags inside the door and you'd say, don't throw your school bags inside the door. Haven't I told you before? Don't throw them inside the door. You've got to go and hang them up in your bedroom. My husband even put special little hooks in their bedroom for them to hang their bags on. And, you know, and that's what they're greeted with. I mean, that's a great homecoming message, isn't it? And then you ask them to set the table and say, I told you to put the fork on the left-hand side, the knife on the right. Why can't you get it right? I'm always telling you to do it, you know. And then by the time they get to bed, you're at them about, why did you drop your underwear on the floor? I've always told you to pick your underwear up and put it in the washing basket. And, you know, I can imagine that some nights my kids would be climbing into bed and thinking, this woman, I'm just never going to meet the standards of this woman. And that's a bad way to go to bed. Of course, as you know, we should always fix up any problems that we've had with our kids before they go to sleep because it rests in that subconscious mind and affects them deeply. But sometimes too, we just expect too much of them. Now, I'm not saying that any of those things that kids shouldn't do. They should do them, but there are ways to handle them, and it's far better than nagging, yelling, screaming, all that kind of thing. Okay, next one. My mum brings up my past Well, my dad brings up my past faults and failings. Well, we know that if you keep on talking about kids' failures, you are programming them to fail. My parents embarrass me, shame me or humiliate me. There are so many things that we can do to our kids in labelling them that are so damaging. I've had parents sometimes come up to me when I've given parenting seminars and say, oh, you know, this is Johnny and he's our quiet one, and this is Jeremiah or whatever, and he's our wild one, and this is my little shy one, and they've got their little labels. And you know what happens? They grow up just like what you've said. And you say, well, I was always right. But in actual fact, what you're doing is you're speaking it into those children. And I'll see, sometimes I say, this is our little shy one. You see a little kid go like this. Now, how is he ever going to be any different when the parents keep saying, he's our shy one, you know? Or this is my wild one. What are you going to have, a wild kid? So we have to be so careful that we don't label our children like that, and we give them good prescriptions, not bad ones. I know it's so easy for us to come out of our mouths, you know, you'll never learn manners, you know, or you're so stupid, why can't you remember? Isn't that an easy thing to say? You'll never amount to anything. You're just a pest, you're just a nuisance. And we can say all these things to our kids, and you know what happens? That subconscious mind records everything. Everything that we've ever said to it is recorded inside their minds. That's pretty awful, isn't it? I wonder what would happen if we turned back the tape recorder and listened to ourselves and what we'd said to our kids. What fruit we're going to produce as a result of those little seeds that we've sown in their lives. So we have to be so careful that we don't say those damaging things. Now look, I'm human and I've said those things, okay? So I don't want you to think that I've been so fantastic that I can get up here and tell you how wonderful I was. I've said some of those things, but I've gone back to my kids and said, I'm sorry, I should never have said that. That's not true, you're not stupid or whatever it was. You're not a pest, you're wonderful. And you're a precious child, you're a valuable child, you're a wanted child, you're a special child, and I really love you and I should never have said that, please forgive me. And I've wiped that out of that memory of their mind and gone back and made it right because it's so damaging, so damaging. Okay, the next one is my parents never wanted me. Now, I'll tell you, there are many kids going around on this planet that were not planned. Okay, maybe they came before you had planned to get married. Maybe they came before you wanted to start a family and you wanted to have two incomes a lot longer, or maybe you thought you'd finished your childbearing and another one came along. There are many kids who came along that weren't planned. And sometimes we can tend to even say that to our kids, especially in moments of frustration. Well, I never really wanted you anyway, you know. And once again, that's just so devastating to a child. It's just saying to a child, I never really wanted you. So the kids think, what's the point of me living? Why am I here? What's my existence for? If my own mother and father didn't want me, then what's my future? And that can be very, very damaging. So we have to realise that once again, no child actually is unplanned, because guess what? If the mum and dad didn't plan it, who did? Starts with G? 3 letters? You're a bright lot. Okay. God always had it planned, and actually says in the Bible that God had everybody on the planet planned before he even made the planet. Isn't that incredible? So our children were planned. And Mal Fletcher is one guy who goes around talking to teenagers a lot in Australia, and he goes to many kids and he says to them, you are not an accident of birth. When he says that, he said he sees tears welling up in those kids' eyes and dripping down their cheeks. Now what a tragedy, these are teenagers, that they've grown up all those years thinking they're an accident of birth. Isn't that awful? You don't want your kids to grow up like that, do you? You need to tell them that you want them and that you're glad they're there and they're your special son and your special daughter and they're really loved. It's so important, especially if you've got a child that was a boy and you wanted a girl or the other way around. We all have these expectations of what we're going to have as kids, and we grow up and we think, oh, you know, I wanted 3 sons or I wanted 3 daughters or something, and they come along and you can say, oh no, not another one, and we really wanted a girl or we really wanted a boy, and that rejection can go into that child. They say that the rejection can go into a child even when it's in the womb. A child in the womb knows whether its mother wants it, and they say now that a child in the womb even knows whether its father wants it. Isn't that amazing? But once they're born too, we can say things that are so unkind. I know You know, I've heard people say, well, oh, you know, we've got 2 boys and we're really, really hoping for a girl. And even other people come up and say, oh, yeah, I see you've got 3 girls. I suppose you really want a boy now. And I often think, those poor 3 little girls are just like, you know, a bit of a waste, weren't they? You know, we can be so damaging. We need to say, oh, you're a little boy and I just love you and God planned for you to be a little boy and I wanted you to be a little boy and I'm so glad that you're a little boy and you're going to grow up to be a wonderful man and all those kind of things. Okay. Comparing our kids is another next dangerous thing that we shouldn't do. Having favourites in our kids. Sometimes we just get on real well with one of our kids. Other times we just clash with another child. And it's so easy to have favourites, and it's so easy for the kids to grow up knowing that we loved one child more than another. Very, very damaging. We can even say things like that. Why can't you be like your sister? Her bedroom's always so tidy. Why do you live in such mess? Isn't it easy to say all those things? And what are you doing? Do you think that that little kid says, gee, I want to be like my sister. Boy, I'm going to go and clean up my room so I can be like my sister. Do you think they think like that? They just think, I hate my sister. Why is she always so rigidly tidy? It just places rivalry among your kids. You know, if you've got competitive between your kids, one big reason you'll have it is because you've sowed it in by making comments like that. You can eliminate rivalry if you don't compare them like that all the time. All right. Stifling and dominating, of course, as you know, are really bad. But we've got to release the kids as they get older. On the Parenting Teens tape, I go into a lot more detail of that. Manipulating them can be very, very dangerous. Sometimes we manipulate our kids because we just want them to grow up into certain professions that we think they should go into, and we put expectations on what we think they should become and what schooling they should have and whether they go to uni or they get an apprenticeship. And we can force our kids to do things that they don't really want to do. And nowadays we know that you just have to let them go. They might want to go to uni, they might not want to go to uni, they might want to go and push trolleys for the rest of their lives. You know, I know people that have got university degrees who absolutely love doing something else that's got nothing to do with university. Absolutely love it. I could tell you some amazing stories of friends of ours who've got right out of the academic field and done something they really wanted to do, and really the only reason they went to uni was because their parents pushed them. So we have to be so careful that we don't put our expectations on kids. Okay, the appearance. I resent my appearance. I'm ashamed of my looks. I think we'll just leave that one. The next one is I never win anything. I'm always left out. I'm always the last one picked. I remember once when my youngest son was at school and he came home one day and he said, I looked at him actually and he was a bit sunburnt, and I said, oh darling, you look like you've been out in the sun all day. How come you know, in 6th grade you've been out in the sun all day? And he said, well, he said, as a matter of fact, it was school sports today. And I said, oh, right. I said, well, why didn't you tell me I would have come up? He said, oh, well, there wasn't really much point in you coming up, Mum, because I really wasn't in anything. And I said, oh, that's okay, fair enough. And he said, well, actually, he said, I did try. He said, I tried for the events. In fact, he said, Mum, I tried for every event and I never got in any of them. And I said, oh, all right, love. It didn't really worry me that much, but I was concerned about how he felt about himself. And he said, but it was all right. He said, the teacher said I could be the messenger boy. And I said, oh, that's great. Yeah, the messenger boy, what a good idea. I thought, bright teacher, you know, kid that's tried for every event, obviously wants to be in it. They've made him a messenger boy. And he said, yeah, but he said, the trouble is there wasn't any messages. Now, the thing is, that could make or break a kid's ego, as you know. It could really damage it. But there are things that you can do to handle it, and this is one good example because I did all the right things, but I didn't always in other times. But I did say to him, well, you know, if you really want to be good at athletics, let's go join an athletics club. Oh, no, I don't really care about it that much, Mum. And he understood that because he'd failed in that one area, it didn't make him a failure in everything. And that's what's so important. You can have weaknesses in one area. It doesn't mean to say that you're going to be a whole failure in your whole life. He had other things he knew he was strong in, didn't really matter. So I said to him, I'm still proud of you for trying. You can learn from your failures. Everyone can't be a winner. Doesn't mean you're a failure. You're strong in other areas. Do your best, even though it's not up to other people's expectations. Learn to accept your limitations. And so that's just being realistic, as we talked about at the beginning. Okay, we'll just go over the page. How can we make sure that our kids are loved unconditionally? It is so important that they are loved unconditionally. One thing that we can do just before we go on to those notes is to realise that each child is unique. It is so important to understand that our children are different. Now, I've written down here some things that I've thought of that have made our kids different from the other. Maybe if we have a look down this side here first. The coping mechanisms of kids are different. Some kids cope well with stress, some come undone. Ways of handling conflict. You see some kids head on into conflict, other kids back right out, don't they? Ways of learning. Some kids learn through looking at things, some kids learn through hearing, other kids are kinesthetic, they call them. That means that they learn by touching and moving. And, you know, as a teacher, I can see some kids just, the whole time they're listening, they're tapping with a pencil, and they're not really being naughty. That's the way they listen. That's the way they can concentrate, is by being a bit wriggly or moving about or banging something, or that's just the kind of person they are. Very hard for a child like that in the schoolroom where they've got a rigid teacher, as you can imagine. They say, oh, he's always a disruption. But really, that's the way he learns. We've got to understand all those things. Kids have different interests. Some kids are more interested in people. Other kids are more interested in things. There's nothing wrong with any of these things. It's just the differences that we notice in them. Of course, others' strengths and weaknesses. Some kids have deep love needs, desperate love needs. Some kids are born like that. It's nothing to do with your bad parenting. They are just born with deep, desperate love needs. And it's like you're pouring love into a container and it's got no bottom in it. Do you ever feel like that with any of your kids? They're just a child who's just born with deep love needs. Nothing to do with your bad parenting. Other kids are just sort of happy-go-lucky. Nothing really affects them terribly much, and they just go on through life without having deep love needs. Some kids think in different order from others, and we think, well, that's crazy, but each one is different. Some kids get motivated by some things, some kids get motivated by others. Some kids are competitive, some are non-competitive. It's okay to be either. Some kids' reaction to correction, you know, some children, if you just raise your voice a little bit, they just crumble inside, don't they? Destroys them. Other kids, you can get as hard as you like and they're just so tough it doesn't seem to have any reaction on them at all. Different talents and abilities in each child. Different reactions. Some kids can react under stress, they react emotionally, they just go right off emotionally. Some kids react logically, rationally. They can think things out clearly. Some kids are outgoing, extroverted. Some kids are quiet. They'll never be the life of the party. There's nothing wrong with that. We shouldn't force them to be. And of course the way that we perceive things is different for each person. Now, I find these kind of personalities really fascinating. And I discovered in the Bible that it says here that kids are different. Train up a child in the way he should go and in keeping with his individual gift or bent. In other words, every child has an individual gift. We knew they all had an individual bent, but they all have an individual gift. Every child is born with an individual gift. He's actually conceived with it. Just as he gets his genetic package with his hair colour and his eye colour, along comes his gifting. Now we need to find out what their gifting is, because the Bible says train them up in the way they should go in keeping or in accordance with their individual gift. It's very, very important we find out what their gifting is, because we might be trying to train up a child to be, for instance, an extrovert, when in actual fact God made them an introvert, and that's fine. We might be training them up to be musical when in fact they're not musical. There are many giftings that we could talk about that are so different in each child, and we need to find out what they are. Now, the best way I've ever found out to find out our kids' gifting is to read this book, which I just happen to have on sale. The best manual that I have found for helping to understand ourselves and understanding our kids. And I found that as I read that and understood myself, I could see where my parenting was with my kids, why it was working with some and not with others, and also how my children thought and how they felt about things and why some things interested them and some didn't. Then I could find out what their giftings were, and I could do, as the Bible says here, train them according to their giftings. It's vital that we find out what they are, because we might be trying to make them into some sort of child that they're just not meant to be. And that, of course, affects their self-image, because all the time they're experiencing failure, failure, failure. The other thing that I found really helpful was learning the temperaments of the children. And the best book that I found, and I don't sell this one because you can go to a bookshop and get it easy enough. The best one I found is Raising the Curtain on Raising Your Children. And that's by Florence Littauer. She's a marvellous author, with a really interesting author, easy to read. I've got it for loan if you like. But as I say, a lot of bookshops carry this book, Raising the Curtain on Raising Your Children. And she talks about the 4 temperaments and how they relate to your children. Now, if you're not familiar with the temperaments, I'll just show you them here. Tis you, Alan. Cuddly, warm, lovable. Yep. This one is referred to by Florence Littauer as a sanguine. Are you familiar with that term, sanguine? Other people call them different names, all right, but I'll just call them the names that actually Hippocrates gave them these names. It's about the oldest way of working out the personalities that we have. There are other different ways and different names, but we'll just call them these ones. Sanguine is the outgoing, lovable person, popular, warm, friendly, but they're a bit forgetful. They don't always do things that they promise to do. Each one has its strengths and weaknesses. Then there's this one. If you're familiar with the temperaments, what do you think that one is? Choleric, yep. Bossy, demanding, controlling are the negative side, but they're a leader and they get things done and they're productive and they remember things, and you give them a job and you know it'll be finished. But sometimes they hurt people on the way. You see, the job's more important than the people. Then we have the one that gets easily depressed, feels deeply for themselves, feels deeply for other people, very talented, often musical or artistic. What are they? Melancholy. And then the last one is easygoing and unflappable and steady in a crisis. People call them Mr. Nice Guy. And but they don't often get a lot done because they're a bit sort of lazy and unmotivated, and they let the world go by. And that's called a phlegmatic. Now, in actual fact, I'm making it far too simple, because in actual fact, we're really all like this. Okay? We've got a bit of everything in us. But it's just that one seems to be more prominent than the other. Now, you need to understand that with your kids. That's why I suggest you get that book, because you'll find out what you are, but you'll also find out what your children are. And that's vital, because as you find out what your children are, you'll know how to handle them better. For instance, if you've got a choleric child, you just don't come down hard on them all the time and try and control them, because they want to control you, and you're just going to have clash after clash after clash, all right? If you've got a little melancholy, sensitive one and you come bulldozing at them and expect them to change activities at the drop of a hat like that, you'll have silent rebellion on your hands. And if you know how to lead them, you won't be clashing with them all the time. Okay, so they really need desperately our love. I'll just cover this bit up just before you got interested in it. Our incoming message is, I love you, okay? But unfortunately, this is a filter. Here's our child. Now, we're trying to get across to them we love them, but the thing is, do they feel loved? That's the important thing. You see, I deal with both sides. I deal with the parents, I deal with the kids. And the kids will say to me, my parents don't really love me. But I know the parents, and I know they do love their kids. What's happening? Well, it's sometimes there's a filter there, and it's the love is just not getting through. Now, the filter can be made of many things. A melancholy child automatically has a big filter. They're born with it. Nothing to do with your bad parenting. Talking about the giftings, the mercy or the compassion child that's mentioned in this book automatically has a big filter. In other words, when you say to that child, I love you, they think, no, you don't. Doesn't matter what you've done to them, they just automatically think, no, you don't. You couldn't love me. I'm so bad. Because that's the way they think about themselves. They see all their imperfections. All right? So you need to understand how to get love through to that child. Now, this filter could also be childhood trauma, child abuse, sexual abuse, bad experience with a teacher. There can be so many things that can make that filter thick. But I'm going to show you 5 easy ways to get through that filter, and you will know that your child is loved. They're in the notes. Let me just show you what Ross Campbell said about how important love is. Ross Campbell's the guy who wrote the book How to Really Love Your Child and How to Really Love Your Teenager that I've got these 5 things from. Now, he wrote, I have never seen a sexually deviated child who has had a warm, loving, affectionate, relationship with his father. Isn't that amazing? Dads, you've got a big job. Mums have got a big job too. Okay, so the first one is using your hands. Okay, we're going to talk about using your hands, using your eyes, using your feet, using your ears and using your mouth. Easy way to remember them. First one is using your hands. Affectionate touch is essential for your child's physical and emotional health. We say that kids have got skin hunger. And if they're not getting adequate touching, they will feel that skin hunger even though they can't name it. Small children actually become hyperactive without it and irritable. It's so important that they have it. You know, they say that, this sounds pretty high, but this is what these people who study these things, if you get 4 hugs a day, that's just survival. If you get 8 hugs a day, well, that's maintenance. And if you get 12 hugs a day, that's growth.
What if you get 20?
Well, that's terrific. If there's a total lack of hugs and caressing, the child feels unlovable. And that's bad. We don't want our kids to feel unlovable. It is very, very important that they feel loved. Now, here's Garfield, who of course is the perfect example of all people. Oh no, I'm being hugged. How dare you hug an unarmed cat from behind? I feel pretty good actually. Now that is how some of our kids react, especially when they get to teenage years. Now, some kids are born not really wanting a lot of physical contact, and if you've got a child like that, doesn't really have hugs and warmth and stuff, right? That's why I brought Virginia along. All say hello to Virginia, please. Hello, boys and girls. Okay, here's Virginia. Now, Virginia went through a stage when she didn't want to be touched a lot, and kids do go through this. When they get to puberty, just before puberty, teenage years, often they go through it, but some kids are born like it once again, and it might not be anything to do with your bad parenting, they just like it. What do we do if a kid doesn't really want hugs? Well, our first reaction is to draw right back and say, well, I'm not going to touch them anymore. But that's bad, because all kids need hugs. Teenage boys need hugs from their mother and from their father. Teenage girls need hugs from their mother and their father. If they don't get that kind of physical contact from their parents, they will go out and get it somewhere else. Promiscuous sex is one of the things that comes out from not having adequate love. So we've got to keep loving them, but we can't just go out and give them great big hugs and expect them to say, well, thanks, Mum, that was wonderful, if they're going through a stage where they don't really want hugs. So what we do is we gradually build up to giving them hugs. It might just be a little squeeze on the hand as we go past them. It might be a little tap on their arm. It might just be a little pat on their back. It might be just a friendly poke in their ribs. Somehow make contact with that child every day. Somehow make some contact with that child every day. Now, if you find that when you put your arm around their shoulder, you feel them sort of stiffen up, don't leave it there very long. They're not really ready for it. Just leave it there for a short time, then take your hand away. And next time, just leave it there a teensy-weensy bit longer. Okay? And as you do it, you gradually build up the amount of time that you touch them or the area that you touch them. In other words, you might have only just gone to going like that, and now you're going to really putting your arm right around them. And then holding it there for a few seconds. You might be able to do that only for a whole week. That might be all you can do. Whole month even. But then later on, you just hold your arm there a little bit longer, or you go around a little bit further, or you just maybe tousle their hair. You don't do that to a teenage girl when she's just about to go out. But it might be just that. I found if my kids went through a stage like that, that when they were watching telly or reading a book or something, they're a bit distracted, I could just get away with a little bit more. All right? Just tousling their head, rubbing your fingers through their head or rubbing them on the back or something, and they'll let you do it. And gradually you can build down that resistance until you're actually back to giving them full hugs. And I've done it with many, many people, and I've never had one failure yet, all right? It does happen, it does work, but you've got to be gradual about it. Don't expect them always to every day enthusiastically hug you. There's some days they may not feel like it, so all you do is just touch them a little bit. But make sure you touch them somehow, a little bit, even if they're not in the mood. You know, you're not always in the mood for a hug, are you? Is that right? So we go through moods, don't we? We just don't want physical contact, but just a little bit, nothing that's going to really offend them. And if they're embarrassed about it, don't do it in front of their friends. You know, some parents make kids do things that are so uncomfortable for them. I've heard some parents say, kiss mum goodbye, you know, at the school gate. You know, a grade 3 boy, he doesn't want to kiss his mum goodbye in front of everybody at the school gate. So we don't force them to do it. We don't force them to do it in front of their friends. We're just very sensible about it. And as they learn that we're going to be sensible, we're not going to force them to do it, and we're not going to take more of their personal space than they can handle, they will learn to trust us until we can actually do it. This is a fantastic way of getting results with stepchildren and people that maybe you haven't had experience with growing up from birth, but you can draw on that relationship by learning to touch them. It works wonders. Okay, I'll go into that more on the Parenting Teens tape too. Next one is using your eyes. Show your child he is special and important to you by looking into your eyes as you converse. Now, when I read this in Ross Campbell's book, I thought, tick that one off, Liz, you got that one right, you look into their eyes. It was like this, get up right now and clean your bedroom this very minute. I was looking in their eyes, all right, but that wasn't what Ross Campbell meant at all. Don't you dare do that again. Of course you look in their eyes to say things like that. But this is when they come home from school and they're bubbling over with all the news of the day and you're really busy, and the last thing you want to do is listen to them, and you just want to put your feet up, dads, and turn the telly on and get away. You know, I want to just watch the telly. I've got a classic picture of that here. I know how you dads feel. This is just not what we do when we're trying to be doing eye contact. Imagine how loved and special a child feels. You're drained and you're emotionally and physically drained by the end of the day, and the last thing you want to do is give your kids some love. But remember this, soon they will be grown up and be gone. Honestly, those parenting days are over so quickly and they're off. Once they're 18, got their licence, got a car, you hardly ever see them. It's not really all that long. And you'll be saying, why didn't I spend more time with my kids? Because they are not going to want to spend time with you if you haven't spent time with them when they're little, and they'll be gone. And those hours that you could have just been reading them a story instead of watching the news are gone. Did you know? It doesn't really matter whether you watch the news or not, it still happens. Did you realise that? Yeah? We get so bound up by having to know what's on at the news that we ignore our families and current affairs and all those kind of things. And if you want to know more about that, listen to that TV tape. But the thing is, it's so important to spend time with your kids. And when they're telling you the exciting things, to look in their eyes. You know, my kids are in their 20s. Do you know what they're doing when they're telling me something? They're still looking for my eye contact. And if I'm so preoccupied doing something else, which is so easy to be preoccupied doing something else, they know I'm not really giving them my attention. You know we women have got more left-right brain connections, don't you? You know we can do more things than once, don't we? You know, the men can only do one thing at a time. But we can do more than one thing at a time. But that can be a trap, you see, because I can be doing the washing, cooking the tea, answering the phone, writing a letter, you know, all at once, and the kid's talking to me. And to me, it's almost like a waste of time to stop doing all that and listen to the child. Are any of you like that? But that's when they need you. You need to stop what you're doing and give them eye contact. And you'll find that as you pour that love into them through your eyes, you're really saying to them, you are more special, more important to me at this time than anything else in the world. And I'm going to give you my total attention. And you know what happens when you do that? You're filling up their love needs. And after a while, they'll go off and they're quite happy. But if you haven't stopped and given them that eye contact, they're clingy. They're so clingy, they hang on to you and they want to say it over and over again, and they're pulling on you and, Dad, Dad. So it's just a little bit of something that you can give them. It really says, I love you. Now, you'll find that if you're loving your kids conditionally, the last thing you want to do is look in their eyes. First thing we do is we withdraw eye contact. You have a look next time you're angry with your kids. Are you withdrawing eye contact from them? Because that means that you're loving them conditionally. Very painful for a child if you won't look them in the eyes just because you're not accepting them. Next one is using your feet. showing your commitment to them by doing things together. Reading to them is absolutely marvellous. It's a bit of a lost art now because TV's so readily available and CDs and cassettes and stuff, but kids really love to curl up with you and for you to read them a book. It's an excellent time. Get to know your child as an individual. Undivided attention makes him feel loved and valuable. Lots of fun, lots of laughter, all that kind of thing are the memories that they have. It's amazing. That's what they'll remember. They won't remember whether you've, washed the kitchen windows or not. They'll remember the fun family times together. Train him to do chores and responsibilities. This will be their reaction for sure. How long, O Lord, must I suffer under this heavy-handed taskmaster in these chains of bondage? Kids react horribly when you ask them to do chores, but did you know something? A child who's got regular chores is more likely to grow up with a good self-image than one who doesn't. Isn't that amazing? Even though it takes effort to train them how to do these things, they will grow up with a better self-image than if you let them get away with it. And don't worry, they'll manipulate you with every tactic they can think of to try and get out of doing the jobs. They're brilliant at it. But if you insist on them doing some chores, they're more likely to have a good self-image. Okay, I'll just mention here, in America they did a survey of fathers to work out how much time they spent with their kids. There are 2 studies done. Cornell University did one, and they found that the father of preschoolers spent actually 37.7 seconds a day communicating with their preschooler. When they got up to older age, they actually spent 12.5 minutes daily talking to their kids, and of that, 8 minutes was spent arguing about the clothes the kids wore, their table manners, and the TV programs that they watched. Not a very good record, is it? So dads, you have to be so careful that you spend quality time with your kids that involves building their self-image up, not all the time dragging it down by criticising them, but building them up. Next one is using your ears. Listen, really listen. James 1:19 says, be swift to hear and slow to speak. Boy, how often we're the other way around. Spending time now can save you years of heartbreak. And bedtime is a wonderful time. Oh, you find the kids will open up so much to you at bedtime because they're delaying having to go to sleep, It's one of their little ploys, of course. But they'll open up about all sorts of things because they know that they can leave the bedroom light on as long as you're going to listen to them. But it is also good, though, because at night time they're beginning to think about what's really bothered them during the day, and they start to bring up things that really have been on their mind. And it's good for them to get rid of them before they go to sleep. Actually, I know what it's like to have kids, and at night time, really, the last thing you want to do is talk to them. You're just anxious to get them into bed and shut the door and have some time on your own often, aren't you, after an exhausting day? And the kids really need your attention sometimes still, and they still haven't got their emotional needs met. And so maybe you just have to, even though you're exhausted, spend 10 or 15 minutes curled up on the bed with them, cuddling them or reading them a book or something, and it's not dependent on their behaviour, you see. Usually when they've been revolting all day, the last thing you want to do is spend time with them, isn't it? You just want to but that's the time they desperately need you most. Isn't that amazing? That time when they have really had a bad day. And the last one is use your mouth. Proverbs 18:20 and 21 says, what's it say? Death and life are in the power of the tongue. Now, I know from experience that you can create death in the home with your tongue, or you can create life. Now, creating death is just going on and on, nagging, criticising, talking about their negative faults, going on and on about them, and you can create a death atmosphere in the home. The same conditions can be in the home, the kids have been the same behaviour, and you can create life. How? By praising them for the good things that they have done. There might be something that they've done good that day. They might have had a rotten day all day, but there's one good thing at least that you can bring out and praise. Now, did you know that kids respond far better to praise than they do to criticism? If you get something that they've done and you say that's great what you've done, even though they've had a rotten day all day with you, what they want to do next day is repeat that because they want to get that praise again. We all love praise, don't we? Do we? Yeah, we thrive on it. Somebody says, oh, that was really delicious. When you've cooked a meal and you think, oh, gee, I think I might cook again tomorrow night. Okay, the kids, they love it. And not just speaking praise, but writing it down is fantastic. Now, some people express themselves better by writing. Then do it. My husband loves writing. So what has he done with our kids? Ever since they could read, he's written little notes to them. Not do the garden. They're the sort of notes I write. His ones are, I love you, son. I'm proud to be your father. You're a precious son to me. I'm so glad that you're in our house. I'm so glad you're in our family. I just think you're a great guy. Speaking into them what a great person they are. Now, other times you might be specific, like, you've done such a fantastic job today. We were building an extension on our house, and he wrote a note to a letter to our son, and he said, thank you, for working beside me all day. It probably wasn't all that exciting, hammering nails in all day, but you stuck at it with me, and I'm glad that you did it. And I want to tell you I'm proud of you because you did that. So the first kind of letter was just praising him for who he is, and the second one was being specific and praising him for what he had done. And the kids have got, he even wrote poems, and they've got the record of something that they can look at later on when they've had a bad day. They can pull it out, say, well, at least my dad loves me. There's something there tangible. Now, those of you who know my kids, you'll know both of them have got good self-images, wouldn't you say? And it is because I have done all these things on here, not perfectly. I've made lots of mistakes, but Rob's been the perfect one. He's going, no, he's made some mistakes too, I think, probably. But the thing is that majorly we have emphasised these things today, and that's why I can say, even though my two children are completely different and have got totally different needs, they have grown up with good self-image because we have been prepared to put in the principles that I've talked about tonight. And I can tell you they work. They really work. It is hard work, but they do work. Now, has anybody got a question they'd like to ask before we have a break? Speak up. No? Okay, thanks.